Thank you so much for joining us. Today we are very fortunate to have Doug Wardlow in studio, a former state representative hailing from Eagan who is now running as a Republican to unseat our left-wing Attorney General Keith Ellison here in Minnesota. Doug, thanks so much for being with us.
Wonderful to be here.
We've got a lot to talk about today. I mean, the state of law and order in Minnesota is really in a scary position, with question 2, with, Ellison at the wheel. We've got a lot to get into. But first, I want to discuss question 2, because that's kind of what's on everybody's minds. As our viewers might know, this is a question that will be put to referendum on November 2nd that gives Minneapolis voters the option to effectively replace the Minneapolis Police Department with something else that would be controlled by the city council. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, question 2 is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Obviously. We have skyrocketing violent crime across Minneapolis, across St. Paul. Actually, we have a 17% increase in violent crime across the entire state.
Really?
So a pervasive climate of lawlessness has really taken hold. And Keith Ellison is largely to blame because he has done nothing as violent crime has skyrocketed. He stood back and did nothing as our city's burned. He even went out, 3 days into the Minneapolis riots last summer and took a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. out of context and said that riots are the way that the unheard get heard.
I remember that.
Yeah, and he basically indicated that people would be right to direct their anger at the police. So he has been engaging in a war on our police, undermining their morale, making it much harder for them to do their jobs. And now he's supporting this question 2 to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department and to replace it with a Department of Public Safety that will take what they're calling a comprehensive public health approach. Now, no one knows what that means.
Right.
And will only use police officers, armed police officers, if necessary. So you're going to see a further reduction in police levels. And if this thing passes, and I'm hopeful it will not, because it is such a terrible idea, but if it were to pass, it would immediately further demoralize the police. So you would see an immediate impact on public safety if this thing passes. But I'm very hopeful that it won't pass. Good thing is the people of Minnesota, traveling all over the state, running for Attorney General, and in Minneapolis and across the state, people are ready for change. They want to move back to America's founding principles. They want to move back to law and order.
Right.
They support law enforcement. So I think that this measure will fail.
Yeah.
And we're going to see, we're going to be able to turn things around in Minneapolis when I'm Attorney General.
Absolutely. What do you think it means that our present Attorney General is literally anti-law enforcement? I mean, how do we have the chief legal counsel of the state hating the law? That's just astounding to me.
Right. Well, Keith Ellison, you're right. He is the top legal and law enforcement official in the state.
Right.
And it is absolutely ridiculous for him to take an anti-law enforcement stance. But if you look at his history, he's got a long history of anti-police bias. He was an acolyte of Louis Farrakhan back in the 90s.
Yeah.
So a terrible anti-Semite. And he worked and rallied and raised money for people like Sarah Jane Olson, who was convicted of planting pipe bombs under cop cars in Los Angeles in 1975.
Explain that to us. What's his connection? Because that sounds like a terrorist.
Yes, well, yeah, domestic terrorist. Yeah,
Right,
absolutely. Yeah, Kathleen Celaya, Sarah Jane Olson, she committed that crime back in 1975, and then she was in Minnesota for a while, living under an alias, and then she was discovered here. And Keith Ellison actually helped raise money for her, helped rally for her, spoke out in support of her, even though she is a domestic terrorist.
Right.
And the folks that, the terrible people that shot Officer Jerry Hoff back in, I think it was 1995. Keith Ellison rallied and raised money and supported for those people as well.
Back in the 90s he was supporting?
Yes, back in the 90s.
Wow.
So he's got a history of anti-police bias. He's now taken his anti-police bias into the Office of Attorney General, where he is the top legal and law enforcement official in the state, and he is waging that war against the police.
Yeah.
Just consider that he has poured enormous resources into the prosecution of police and taken over prosecutions of police, but his office hasn't taken over a single prosecution of anything else, looting or rioting or fomenting violence. It is unconscionable.
Right.
So we need to replace him, and we will do that. We are on the path to victory. Things are looking very good.
Excellent. How did Minnesota get to a point where we have someone who spent 25 years defending domestic terrorists, hating the police, in a position, to gut the police department? How did that even happen?
Well, Keith Ellison, he was in Congress. He was former deputy chair of the Democratic National Committee, so he's got a strong political machine. And in 2018, when he left Congress and then ran for Attorney General, I ran against him for Attorney General in 2018, and we came very close to winning, within about 3.5 points, in a very difficult year for Republicans. And that year, the headwinds were extremely strong.
They were.
The Democrat vote in the 5th Congressional District, where Minneapolis is that year, was so large that it was almost equivalent to the entire vote in the 8th Congressional District up in the Arrowhead in northern Minnesota. So that just gives you a sense of how unprecedentedly high Democratic turnout was. So in any other year, our campaign would have won. We were up in the polls 7 points about 2 weeks out. The Democrats then, they figured they won the 2 U.S. Senate races that year and the governor's race pretty early on, and they poured all of their resources into the Attorney General's race. They spent about $8 million in the last 2 weeks. They said that I was going to take away people's pre-existing conditions coverage if I was AG, which is a complete lie. I would never do that, and the AG can't even do that anyway. But Democrats have a problem with truth sometimes.
Yeah.
And so that's how it happened. They were able to seize on that, and by lying and by spending all that money, they were just able to eke out a very close victory. The good thing is, we did about 800 campaign appearances in 2018. We built a donor network. We raised and spent more than any other Republican candidates ever spent in an AG race ever. And we're on track to exceed that this time. So we built a strong base of support.
In Minnesota or nationally?
In Minnesota. Actually, well, in Minnesota.
Okay.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
And so we've got that strong base of support. We're not starting from scratch. And we're going up against a tough incumbent like Keith Ellison. You really can't start from scratch. He's got that political machine, but so do we.
Yeah. Right.
We've done this before, and we're launching from that base. And it's kind of nice now, last time around, nobody was paying attention to the AG race.
Right.
About 4 years ago at this point, people are calling donors, they'd hang up, who are you, what's going on? Right. Now, though, they know who I am. They're pledging money, the money's coming in, things are looking very good, and people are waking up. They're rejecting Keith Ellison's radical extremism.
You touched on this a second ago, but it sounds like when you're traveling around Minnesota and talking to people, they're ready for more law and order. Despite what the mainstream media is telling us, despite what the propaganda machines are saying, it seems like people actually want more police. Is that accurate?
That is absolutely accurate. The people of Minnesota do want more police.
Yeah.
The people of, and in particular, folks in minority neighborhoods in Minneapolis, they want more police by large majorities, right? So all across the state, people support law enforcement. It's just a fringe on the far progressive left, that's led by Keith Ellison and his allies like Ilhan Omar, that are anti-law enforcement. Unfortunately, they are very loud.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they do have the power right now, but we are going to take it back from them. And and we're going to win the office of Attorney General not for the cause of the Republican Party or anything partisan, because it really is an office that shouldn't be political. We're going to take the politics out of the office.
Yeah.
I'm running to win that office for the cause of the rule of law, for law and order, and for the Constitution.
Absolutely. So speaking on what you do once you're in office, how exactly can you impact the process in Minneapolis? Because it seems like every day Alpha News is publishing articles about how Minneapolis prosecutors are just not cracking down on crime. They're doing nothing. They're letting people walk with $0 bail. They're declining to prosecute. If you become Attorney General, would you be able to sort of bring those people along?
Absolutely. There's a lot we can do from the Attorney General's office, and I'm the only candidate in the race that really has the experience to get in there on day one and start affecting change and start actually restoring law and order. And here's how we're going to do that. We're going to hire prosecutors into the office. We are going to expand the criminal law division of the office, which the Democrats have essentially eviscerated, and build that back up. And that does two things. First of all, for the county attorneys that are doing a good job, we can go out and we can support them. We can make sure that they have all the resources that they need to do their jobs. Now, if a county attorney, like say John Choi, or the Hennepin County Attorney, Mike Freeman, if they're not doing their jobs, if they're not prosecuting aggressively and putting criminals behind bars, then we can go and we can offer and then we can take over prosecutions from them. And we can do the prosecutions in-house and make sure that we're stopping that cycle of arrest and release. Because that's what's demoralizing the police the most, right? They are going out doing their jobs, they're in tough situations, they're risking their lives every day, and they go and they make an arrest. And then, the person that's arrested goes and gets an easy plea bargain, or just isn't prosecuted, or is just released. And then they see them back out on the streets days later, weeks later, threatening to commit the same kinds of crimes.
We published a story not long ago where some guy was brought in for drunk driving and 7 hours later stole a car because they just let him go.
That's just insane. So we need to make sure that when the police do their job, that it's followed up by prosecution and aggressive prosecution, because we need to restore law and order, and we do that by making sure that lawlessness has consequences, that breaking the law has serious consequences. So we're going to put those criminals in prison and turn the whole situation around. Then we can use the bully pulpit of the AG office to just send the message that, law enforcement, we got your back, we are supporting you. Now, of course, if a law enforcement officer commits a crime, then they get due process and the presumption of innocence as well, but we prosecute all crimes evenly. We're not going to selectively prosecute. We're not going to take over just one category of cases like Keith Ellison has and focus on one thing to push a political agenda.
For sure.
We're going to take the politics out of the office.
So if Keith Ellison hasn't been prosecuting crimes, what has he been doing while he's in control?
He has been pushing a political agenda.
Right.
He has been attacking law enforcement. He has been, he's actually appointed 2 special assistant attorneys general who are being paid for. Their salaries are being paid for not by the state of Minnesota, but rather by the special interest group out of New York. And
So they're out-of-state activists, basically.
out-of-state activists pushing a private agenda, and that agenda is to push left-wing environmental lawsuits. And so the state of Minnesota, through these two attorneys who are being paid for by a private interest group under
Right.
Keith Ellison,
Right.
are pushing at least one, I think two or maybe more, I'm not entirely sure, but at least one lawsuit where they're going up against the American Petroleum Institute, ExxonMobil, and other energy companies, and they're trying to make the ridiculous argument that the people of Minnesota have been deceived about climate change. But that's a private agenda,
Yeah.
and that is pushing a political agenda. That's exactly the opposite of what the Attorney General's office should be doing.
Right.
The Attorney General should be there to enforce the law,
Right.
whether the Attorney General agrees with it or not, enforce the law, and then stand up for everyone's constitutional rights. Keith Ellison isn't doing that. He is pushing his private agenda.
I always thought the left was supposedly against big money private interests, but I guess not. I mean,
No,
they
no,
literally
no,
have paid operatives
they're all about it,
in
yes.
the AG's office. Wow,
That's right.
That's astonishing. That's astonishing. So, if you get in there's a lot of issues, of course, other than law and order, even though that's a prominent issue. Tell us what some of your other chief concerns would be.
Absolutely. So critical race theory is a terrible thing, right? Critical race theory is an ideology and a method of teaching and a subject matter that a lot of school districts are pushing on students. And whenever a school district teaches critical race theory, they are imposing racism and creating a hostile environment in schools that discriminates on the basis of race, and that is illegal and it's immoral. But what a lot of people don't realize is that first part, that it is illegal. Anything that creates a hostile environment in a school that discriminates on the basis of race is illegal under state law. We have anti-discrimination laws forbidding discrimination on the basis of race in education and in public accommodations. And then we have similar laws at the federal level. So as Attorney General, we can address this issue. We can make sure that school districts that are, I heard about one exercise a school district did, it was just terrible, where teachers were separating kids out on the basis of skin color and assigning and saying, these guys over here are the oppressors and these people over here are the victims.
You're inherently evil because of your race.
Right,
Is
just
the message.
rank
Yeah.
evil. We're talking
Right,
about
right.
racism. This is
Yeah,
terrible.
it is.
And we need to stop it. So as Attorney General, we can investigate school districts that are doing those things. We can make sure that they're complying with the law. And if necessary, we could take appropriate legal action to stop them and end critical race theory in Minnesota.
So what would that look like? Would the Attorney General's office sue the schools? Is there some sort of other enforcement mechanism? How does that take place?
We could counsel the schools first. We
Okay.
could apply pressure.
Yeah.
If necessary, we can bring a lawsuit because the Attorney General has the inherent authority to bring any lawsuit that the AG believes is in the best interests of the state.
Yeah, it seems like if I was in charge of a school, though, and I was getting counseled by the AG, I might want to shape up my act a little bit.
Exactly
I
right.
see how
yes.
that could hold
So
influence.
hopefully we wouldn't need to bring lawsuits, but if we
Right.
have to do it, we will do it.
Of course, of course. Another issue I've heard you talk about before is election integrity. This is, of course, something that's been on the forefront of our minds for a year and a half now. What's your stance there? What can the Attorney General do on that front?
Absolutely. Well, again, the Attorney General's office is all about enforcing the law and standing up for constitutional rights.
Yeah.
And, there's the one man, one vote principle.
Right,
And
right.
then there are constitutional rights that append to the right to vote. And enforcing the law, voter fraud is a felony in Minnesota. There are several different kinds of voter fraud. And so it's up to the Attorney General's office to enforce these laws. If you don't enforce the law, then it's not worth having the law in the first place, right?
Right, right.
So, in keeping with the mission of the AG's office, and taking the politics out and just enforcing the law and standing up for our constitutional rights, what I will do is investigate voter fraud, and then we will work with county attorneys or directly bring prosecutions of folks that are committing voter fraud. And by doing that, we can send the message that here in Minnesota, if you commit voter fraud, if you try to rig an election, you're going to end up in prison.
Right.
And that is the best way to safeguard the people's vote, to make sure that illegal votes aren't coming in and then altering elections or disenfranchising folks by diluting people that are voting properly and should be voting. So
Yeah. Do you think that's an under-prosecuted crime in Minnesota? I mean, how much of that do you
Yes.
think is going on?
I think there is significant voter fraud in Minnesota, but and it is under prosecuted. Yes.
Yeah.
You don't see many prosecutions of voter fraud. Now, even if there was no voter fraud, just
Right.
assume for a second there wasn't. There is, but just assume that
Yeah,
there
yeah.
wasn't. You would still want to make sure that you design a system where you could be absolutely confident that there is no voter fraud. So you need to eliminate voter fraud, but you also need to make sure that there's not even the appearance of the possibility of voter fraud, and that's
Right.
important because we need to maintain confidence in elections. We need to make sure that people are confident that when an election happens, the results are accurate and the right person is elected. Because if you don't have that, then
Right.
people start questioning whether the government is legitimate. They start questioning the legitimacy of the laws. They start asking whether they should follow the laws. And so you can see how that could lead to a breakdown of the societal order.
Right.
So it's incredibly important that our election system be entirely secure, and that everyone could see it and see that it is entirely secure. And right now, there are significant questions about whether it is secure. So we need to enforce our laws that make voter fraud a felony. We need to make sure that we are prosecuting folks that do that, to give people that confidence, and to just make sure that we don't have voter fraud, so the right people are getting elected.
Sure. I mean, it's an overused cliche, but that's why we need transparency.
Yes.
Absolutely. We have a couple questions from our viewers. Thank you for submitting those. Please continue to write them in the comment section if you have them. Somebody wonders what the Attorney General's ability is to prevent Minnesota from becoming a sanctuary state, of course referring to illegal immigration.
I think the Attorney General can do quite a bit on that issue to prevent Minnesota from becoming a sanctuary state. We can look at standing up and working with federal partners to enforce federal law. We can try to do it on our own. We can go after municipalities or other political subdivisions of the state that are trying to set up sanctuaries and counsel them in the right direction, if necessary, bring lawsuits. So we can do quite a bit to push things in the right direction on that issue.
Awesome, awesome. Speaking of national issues, I've seen Ellison signing on to various lawsuits along with other attorney generals that don't really pertain to Minnesota. They're just sort of left-wing talking point type lawsuits. What are your thoughts on his action there?
Oh, absolutely. Keith Ellison has been looking for basically every lawsuit he can find that pushes kind of the left's agenda, then signing Minnesota up to it, and then using the resources of our Attorney General's office to push these left-wing causes.
Right.
Just like he's brought in those special assistant attorneys general to push left-wing environmental causes, he's doing the same thing with amicus briefs and signing on to lawsuits directly, and it is wrong, because the Attorney General's office should not be political. Now, if the federal government comes in and is violating the rights of Minnesotans and is going beyond the authority that Congress has given the federal government to the executive branch and doing things that directly impacts Minnesota and is clearly illegal, then there is a role for the Attorney General to step in and fight back, and I would do that. But Keith Ellison, what he is doing is purely political. He's just using the resources of the state to push his radical left-wing agenda, and he really is a national leader of the radical left.
Yeah.
Along with Ilhan Omar, he is. So when we defeat Keith Ellison, which we will, and we're going to be doing a great good for the state of Minnesota, but also for the whole country, because we're going to set the progressive left back quite a bit by making sure one of their leaders is consigned to just private life.
Absolutely. Are there any national issues that you would be interested in signing Minnesota onto?
Oh, there are a number of things we would look at, but we'll only sign on to a national issue if it's something where it impacts Minnesota directly, and and there's a clear violation of law happening or a violation of people's constitutional rights.
Yeah, what a novel concept. Local legislators, local officials looking out for the people of their own state.
Yeah.
Very interesting. During the last election, we saw all these controversies with Keith Ellison's character. We had these allegations of spousal abuse. We had these allegations of Antifa. We had all these things. It seems like a lot of these have lapsed from people's minds. Why do you think that is? How has he been able to maintain a positive image of himself despite his radical past?
Well, the mainstream media here in Minnesota is not entirely fair, as you probably are aware. And so they give him quite a bit of cover. And I think that's what's been happening there. But as we move forward in the campaign, we will make sure and remind folks about some of the issues of Keith Ellison's past, like his connections to Louis Farrakhan, radical, terrible, awful, evil anti-Semite. And we will be making sure that people remember that Keith Ellison is not a good guy, reminding them about his anti-police history. We're going to go on the offense, and I did last time, and that's what brought us so close to victory. We came closer to winning in that year than any other statewide candidate by a very significant margin. And we actually got more votes than any Republican candidate has ever received in a midterm election in the state of Minnesota for any office. So we have a demonstrated ability to put votes up on the board. We're going to do that, and we're going to beat Keith Ellison, and we're going to do that by taking the gloves off, making sure that we're being fair, talking about the issues, but also getting out there and just letting people know the facts about Keith Ellison's radical associations, his radical past, and the radical agenda that he's pushing.
For sure. Let's talk coronavirus for a minute, because a lot of Minnesota Republicans right now are talking about measures that they can institute to prevent further COVID lockdowns, to protect business in our state. What would the Attorney General's role be in that push?
Well, if I was Attorney General when all the nonsense around COVID happened, I would have been fighting Governor Walz and pushing back. The Attorney General sits on the Executive Council with the governor, and that is the body that approves all of the governor's executive orders. So we could have fought back there. We could have brought lawsuits if necessary. The Attorney General is there as an independent figure within the executive branch, answerable only to the people of Minnesota for a reason. The framers of the Minnesota Constitution set it up that way so the AG can be a check on the executive branch and on the rest of government to make sure they're following the law.
Ellison hasn't been much of a check, though. He's been more of an enabler, an accelerator even.
That's right. That's right. He's been accelerating and enabling. He has been going after folks, fining people $25,000 under the governor's unconstitutional lockdown edicts and all that nonsense, putting a lot of effort into that. Well, he turns and does nothing with respect to violent crime and so many other issues that he should be dealing with.
Yeah, yeah. That's something that one of our viewers asked about just a second ago. These businesses are getting fined $25,000. Individual people are getting strung up to dry in the face of these COVID regulations. Tell us a little bit about that practice.
Yeah, that to me it strikes me as illegal and unconstitutional. We need to look at, first of all, reforming Chapter 12, the emergency powers section of the law, and that is, of course, a duty for the legislature to take that on. But even short of that, it looks to me that Keith Ellison has been abusing the law and running afoul of the Constitution when he's following these edicts that the governor's putting out there, and did put out there, right, and without any authority other than the governor's so-called emergency powers,
Right.
and imposing these draconian fines on folks just for trying to maintain a living and trying to keep their employees maintaining a living as well. It's just a terrible thing.
Could a new AG office do anything to sort of repair those damages, help out these people that were politically targeted under Ellison's administration?
Yes, I would like to look into that and see if we can do that, because it would be right. That's the right thing to do, to try to repair some of those wrongs.
Yeah, yeah. This is a very interesting AG race because a lot of people, like you said earlier, weren't even aware of what the AG is, what his role is, and it's just been rocketed right to the forefront of everybody's mind here in Minnesota. We appreciate you coming in, discussing some of these issues. We've covered a lot of ground. If there's anything you'd like to leave our viewers with before we wrap up here, what would that be?
Absolutely. I would like to leave the viewers with the idea that the Attorney General is all about enforcing the law and protecting our constitutional rights. And we need to win this office back, and we will win this office back so that we can stand up for the Constitution and for the rule of law and make sure that Minnesotans' will is being expressed through their representatives and that representative government is functioning, but also that your constitutional rights are protected. And I will do exactly that as your Attorney General. We will stand up for your constitutional rights. We will enforce the law. We're going to restore law and order. And those things are so vitally important. And I'm the only candidate on the Republican side here that has the experience on day one to get in there and to do these things. I've got significant litigation experience, courtroom experience, litigation management experience, and I'm the only true conservative in the race that is a viable candidate who can beat Keith Ellison. We just about did it last time. We're going to do it this time. We're applying lessons learned from last time to our campaign plan, and we've got a great campaign team, excitement all across the state. Things are looking very good. The political wind is now at our backs.
Yeah.
We're going to win this thing, and we're going to save Minnesota, make Minnesota safe again, and make Minnesota free again.
Make Minnesota safe again. I like it. I like it. If people want to get involved with your campaign, keep up with what you're doing, follow the race, how can they do that?
Absolutely. Go to DougWardlowAG.com, and they can donate there. They can find out more about the race. They can sign up to volunteer, and also follow us on Facebook, and then also on Twitter. And Twitter, the handle is Doug_Wardlow.
Awesome, awesome. Make Minnesota safe again. I think it's a message we can all get